Go back here.
Is it 11?
Huh?
Is it 11?
Yep. Yeah.
Let's go.
All we need is to open the door, basically, right?
All you need to
I
do
need
is
to get
open the door and you go first. Welcome, everybody. This is very exciting for me to have a student return. Melanie Bacaling graduated in 2013 as a performance major, and as a second major was psychology. So a double major she did in 4 years, and she was also very active in the campus community. So as we talk, I think you'll gather that information, but she is currently on her way to Chicago to be the director of La Boheme at Chicago Lyric, which is quite a feather in her cap at such a young age. So please welcome Melanie Bacaling. Our first podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say this feels like a cute little podcast.
So Melanie, tell us about your adventures to get here at UE that you did in 2009.
Yeah, oh my gosh, throwback. So when I was looking at schools, I knew that I was interested in studying both psychology and music, and I was very interested in coming into the world of performance, specifically from the world of musical theater. I loved musical theater, and that's kind of what got the performance bug in me. And all the schools I was looking at, I was very transparent about my desire to study and have 2 degrees. Most schools told me that I could not do that in 4 years, and I would either have to do a 5-year program or a 6-year program, or make it a major and minor, or figure out some way. And I was like, no, I think I want to do 2 degrees in 4 years. And Evansville was the only school that said that they thought I was crazy, but they would support me in doing it. And I mean, Professor Feather was such a great advisor during all of that, and sometimes would, I think, look at me like, okay, if you say so, but was always very supportive in that, and I'm very, very grateful for that experience. And that was my experience throughout then, not only in the audition process and in the selection process, but also throughout my 4 years here, and not only in this department, but also in the psych department, feeling really supported to kind of make my own path and do what I wanted and take my projects as I desired, because I was also part of the honors program, and ended up kind of doing my own study abroad thing, which I can talk about. But yeah, so I was just kind of making my own thing.
You were also very active on campus.
Yeah.
I think you were the president of Zetas as a sophomore,
Yes.
which was kind of unheard of, and again as a junior, right?
Yes.
What other
Yeah.
activities did you do on campus?
Yeah.
Because that was very busy, plus a double major.
Yes, exactly. I was an RA for a semester in Powell Hall. That was just like I was holding a place for my friend who was the RA, who was studying abroad in Harlexton at the time. So that was a fun little stint. And I was also involved in student alumni ambassadors, and I was also a part of the strategic planning subcommittee that they had created at the time. I think the strategic plan started in like, was 2011, 2012 or something like that. And so I was a part of some student feedback groups with some faculty and community members to kind of help give a direction of where we want the school to go. And so sort of representing the student voice and also the music department voice in those conversations. I was busy. I did a lot.
Yes, you were busy, I remember. So when Melanie came as a freshman, I still remember that class. I think it was the biggest class of music majors we'd ever taken in, or have ever taken in, if I'm correct, in 2009. I also remember the discount rate had gone up to the high 50s, which everyone was screaming about. I think it's much higher than that now. But I had 9 girls, freshman girls, all sopranos, that started with me, and Melanie was one of those. And you know, she was just kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
But as she progressed and worked as a double major, I have to keep including that. But then as a junior, you won the Presser Award, and with the Presser Award money, you went to Salzburg, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to have a study abroad experience because Evansville has such a strong connection with Harlexton, but I knew that there weren't any classes that would benefit the trajectory that I needed, and I really wanted to study something musically involved, something language involved. And so I just sort of did a Google search and found Salzburg's college program that they had, for part of the summer. And so I, with the Presser Award money and also with some sponsorship from the honors program, because I ended up making my honors project, I was able to help fund my experience there. And while I was there, I studied the Mozart and De Ponte libretti with the Mozarteum University faculty and took voice lessons from them and lived with a host mother who really made me practice my German. And I had only taken 2 semesters of German prior to that, so it was a very interesting and hard learning curve. But while I was there, I saw my first operas live as well. I saw Wozzeck at Salzburg Theater, which was the very first one that I saw, and I loved it. It was like it all took place in a public restroom that kind of like got smaller as the play went on, and I was like, oh, the psychology of it really made me nerd out. But then I also got to take a weekend to Vienna and saw Marriage of Figaro at Wiener Staatsoper, and that was one of the operas I was really focusing on during my studies there. And it just kind of felt like all of this alignment where I wasn't really planning on making that trip. I made the trip with some of my classmates at the time. It just so happened that Marriage of Figaro was on that night. They had 1 ticket left in the house that night, and I was like, I'll take it. I'll pay whatever euro you want for it. And it was this beautiful box seat, and I remember just sitting there and just being completely floored to be in that historical theater, to be in that historical city, and to be taking in this art form that I've been learning about in the classrooms here, but to feel the energy of live opera and with those singers. I remember Gerald Finley was singing The Count, and it was just like, it was so magical that I walked away from that performance that night being like, I have to study opera. I need to keep learning about this art form, and I'd always been very into theater and art making, but just like the grandeur, the history, the performance practice of opera was something that I'm like, I need to keep studying this. And so I think it was a combination of that experience and also doing my own continued work with my voice and just singing in the mountains of Salzburg too. There must be something in the water there. That I came back and I felt like I kind of grew in my own confidence of what I wanted and in my own performance practice. And there was just this kind of shift that I felt where I'd always been a very nervous performer in my first few years. You'll probably remember.
Yes, I do.
Where I just, as much as I enjoyed performing and as much as I had performed in high school in like musical theater and everything, there was just something about walking into this space in particular, which did not look as beautiful as it does now. But walking in, and my hands would shake. Even when I was doing my piano drills, my hands would shake, and that would be horrible for all of that. And my breath support would just go, and I just, the amount of performance anxiety that I had was kind of debilitating in some ways. And there was something about that study abroad experience, I think, that just kind of like helped me lock into this passion for performing, but also like continued development of diving into, what is my voice and what do I want to say with my voice and how do I perform with my voice, that kind of had me have this, F it attitude to it all. That honestly then helped me have such an incredible final year where I got to compete in Gumberts, and with my most favorite friends at the time. Josh Cright was my pianist, and Alyssa Brooks was also competing. She was one of my classmates, and just being able to really enjoy the music making instead of feeling inhibited by it. And so that was just a really, really special experience.
Yes. I remember when she returned, because she went after her junior year and came back senior year, and she wasn't totally different, but I could tell there was a lot more burning desire in her, which is something you've got to have. If you want to do a career in music, you have to really love it and have to really have a burning desire to do it. If you don't, you're not going to be successful. But when she came back, she just had this fire, and she just went to town, had a great recital, won Gumberts, I remember that recital because I had another student also on it, and it was a great recital. Everyone performed really well, but she was amazing, so.
Thank you.
Yes. Then she graduated and went off to grad school.
Yeah.
Tell us about Boston.
Yeah, I ended up going to the Boston Conservatory because then in that senior year, I was like, okay, going to grad school, got to study opera more. But I was still very interested in all like the science aspect that I was uncovering with psychology. And actually, my senior thesis here for my psych degree was performance anxiety and doing a kind of broad study on looking at different remedies for that. But I wasn't quite sure that performing was what I wanted to do, so I was interested in the science of it all. So I started looking into this field of voice science, actually, and I thought, well, maybe if, and I didn't want to stop performing, but I was like, maybe if I look for something more on the pedagogical line, I could be a rehabilitator of injured singers. That's exactly what I was thinking about doing, so I thought I would get my master's in vocal pedagogy, and then maybe after that, get my master's in speech-language pathology, and kind of go more into like the medicine route of that. And Boston Conservatory has a great program with the Mass General Hospital. They have a really incredible voice clinic. We got to watch the vocal fold surgery of Adele and Steven Tyler, and play with like their pickled larynxes. It was a great time to nerd out. But so that's what led me to choose that place. And I also felt like Boston Conservatory is a place where the performance standard is really high, and so I knew that it would be a place that would also challenge me in my performing to keep growing and letting kind of, where I had started with all the nervousness continue to grow and adapt and see what else I could find for myself as an artist. And so when I got there, I was very much in the line of like pedagogy. I'm going to teach, I'm going to learn all the science stuff. And then I started working closely with one of the directing faculty there. And as a work study job, I started assistant stage managing, which I had done some stage managing in like high school and middle school. But I was just like, well, I need to make some money, so sure, like I'll do this, and then I can actually be in the room learning and by observation. And I was always very interested in just like being a fly on the wall and just watching how directors work, how conductors work, how singers work, and people who were beyond my ability, being able to just watch and observe. And then I got to get paid for it because I was, in the room making it happen too. And that led me to work more closely with my directing faculty and he took me under his wing, and I kind of just started assisting on all of his projects. He did some stuff around town that was like a gala creation, a lot of different ad hoc projects that were beyond just opera. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I was still teaching. I still had a little studio of students in Boston. And when I graduated, I had an opportunity to do a stage management internship with Aspen Opera Center. And it was just something that one of my faculty I recommended, being like, well, if you're interested in directing, assistant directing in the opera world is very much a stage managerial job. It's a lot of organization, it's a lot of scheduling, it's a lot of understanding, the music and the story, but also just paperwork. And I'm like, well, I'm naturally very good at that. I've always been a very studious person. And so I did this stage management internship, and that led me to meet some more people, ironically, from Boston in Aspen, who worked with the Boston Lyric Opera, and they needed a rehearsal room assistant for their upcoming production of Carmen. So my first job with them, and again, this is after I've graduated from grad school, and so you would think that in hindsight, I'm like, oh wow, I had no pride about being like, I'm a 24-year-old, 25-year-old with a master's. I was sweeping and mopping the floor of this rehearsal room, and so excited to do it because I was able to be in the room once again, learning by observation, learning how a union opera house works, and how these professionals operate and sing and communicate with one another. And so I was just sweeping, mopping the floors, helping move some props around, helping move some giant cars in this production around, and that led me to end up meeting some other people in the company who they ended up hiring me for doing super titles for their next production. And then one of their production assistants dropped out for their spring performances, and they're like, do you want to come be a production assistant? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And all of it felt like it was a very kind of zigzaggy trajectory, and I just kind of kept taking the opportunities that felt right. And at the time, it was like, I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that I want to be in the room. I knew that I was good at stage management. I knew that I was interested in directing. I knew that I was still interested in music making. I had a church job at the time, so I was still like able to get my fulfillment of singing, but I no longer had a strong desire to only perform. And so from that, it was like one opportunity led to another. I ended up meeting some people who then hired me to work at Santa Fe Opera, where I've now been at for 5 summers, and they've created a position for me there as the house assistant director for their whole summer festival. And that's also where I met, then in Santa Fe, I met my current boss at the Metropolitan Opera, where now I'm on the stage directing staff there. So it's like a big snowball that catapulted me forward. And I would say that the journey then to get into directing was probably a little bit more solidified for me during the pandemic, when everything shut down. All the opera companies are like, how do we connect with our audiences? And so I worked with a few companies on creating digital content. I produced a couple of podcasts. I had no idea how to do that before that point in time. I'm sure that we can all relate to learning new skill sets during that period of time. And I curated and produced a few Zoom events. I even did some passion projects with some composer friends where I was like, we're all feeling like we want to make something. Like, if you all record remotely, can you write this? And then we'll record it. And then I was music producing for a little bit too. But with that and doing a little bit of remote film directing, I was taking on a more creative role in a lot of these projects. And that really made me think directing. I think I was always afraid to say it, because every director that I had assisted was, not looking like me at all, or not operating in the way that I operate in the world. And I just didn't think it was for me. And I think I convinced myself that it wasn't for me. And in doing all of these projects during the pandemic, and in many talks with my therapist, I was like, but what if my form of directing just looks a little bit different? And what if my voice matters too, and that how I direct can also exist at the same time as how these white men direct, and that it can all exist in the same plane, and that's a beautiful thing. That is art making. And so then I decided to say that I am a director, which was a very difficult thing for me to actually be able to voice aloud, I will admit, for a while. But I know that words are powerful, so I would say to myself, I am a director. And then I made the decision to retire from stage management because I was getting a lot of gigs there. I had a reputation for being a good stage manager, but I knew that if I kept saying yes to those gigs, I wouldn't be able to say yes to the gigs I really wanted. So that was kind of scary, where I kind of was closing doors when, as a freelancer, you're like, oh my gosh, if I say no, I'm not going to have anything else. But I felt like it was really important for me to make that shift professionally, and so I did. And gratefully, ever since then, it's been all assistant directing, associate directing, or now actual stage directing. So it was a very good shift for me to make. That was a lot.
That was a lot, and very scary, right?
Yeah.
To turn down jobs,
Yeah.
just to walk away.
Yeah, especially in a post-pandemic thing. I was like, are you, what? What am
Are you
I?
crazy? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
So now you're going to be going to Chicago after you leave here.
Yeah.
How did that all come about?
Yeah, so I've worked at Lyric Opera Chicago twice as an assistant director. Once on Fire Straight Up in My Bones, Terrence Blanchard's opera. That was in 2021-22 season. And then I worked on Will Liverman's opera, The Factotum, the following year, I think 2022-23 season. And so that's how I kind of got to know that company and had really great experiences there. But the chief artistic officer there, Matthew Ozawa, who's an incredible director in his own right, has become one of my mentors, and I have been his associate on his Madame Butterfly production. And he had put my name up for this Bohème, and it actually conflicts with his Butterfly production that's happening in Pittsburgh at the same time. So he's like, I don't know if this can work out, but I think this would be a really great opportunity for you. Are you okay with me putting your name forward? And I was like,
No, please don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of a sudden, the fear and the imposter syndrome, really hit. Where I'm like,
Did that
I don't
terrify
know.
you? Because it terrifies me just thinking about it.
Yeah, well, especially because I've come at this career in such a non-traditional way. Usually, a lot of opera directors will do projects at schools or at smaller companies, and I've done a couple of smaller things in the university setting. But they'll have their hand with a bunch of regional companies and be able to kind of figure out their voice and figure out their work ethic and all that stuff. And so the prospect of me having my first go at directing a big production to be at one of the top opera houses in the country, I was just I think I'm skipping some steps, But to have his confidence and support meant so much to me that I'm like, why would I block my own blessings in that? And let me say yes if that's something that could happen. So. He was again, with scheduling, he's I don't know. And at the time, the company general manager, Anthony Freud, was really excited to see my name. And he's like, well, Matthew, I think you have to make this work with this other conflict. And he's like, okay. So the way that this is working out actually is that I will be in Chicago for the next 2.5 weeks. As soon as we're done with our final dress of Bohème, I fly to Pittsburgh to finish up the rehearsals that he had started for Butterfly. I'll fly back to Chicago for the opening night of Bohème, and then I'll go back to Pittsburgh the next day to tech it and then open Butterfly at the end of that. So it's going to be a very busy next 3-4 weeks, but then I'm doing a silent meditation retreat at the end of that, and I'm very excited for that. So that is what is happening there.
So can you explain to our students what it means to be the director?
Yeah.
What all do you have to do? And what all are you responsible for? And what do they expect from you?
Yeah. It's a lot of work. So this production in particular, and this is how a lot of companies operate, especially in a world where we're trying to save money, is they'll have a pre-existing design of a production. So this particular Bohème, which is set in 1880s Paris, very traditionally so, the set, costume, lighting design already existed from many previous iterations of it. That was first done, I think, in 1990, maybe. It's been around for a little bit. Very grand. The set is absolutely gorgeous, by Gerard Holland. And actually, the first director of the production who helped conceive of it with the original designers was Herb Ross, who was the film director on Dirty Dancing and all those other really classic films. So that's kind of a cool little history of it. But so my job then is that within that container they've given me, so they said, okay, you can do whatever stage directing you want within this world, here's your design, is to figure out where I want everybody to be at any point in time. And, we've got a chorus, I think the chorus, there's 80 people in the chorus. I've got 21 kids in it. So Act 2 of Bohème, which I call 20 Minutes of Chaos, is just going to be a full cacophony. And so right now what I've been working on is where do they all go? Where do they come from? How do we keep the story alive, and how do we keep all of our attention from an audience perspective on where my eye is supposed to be within the cacophony? And so it's in the same way I was talking with some of you voice students earlier in the week about when you have a piece starting with the text. So for me, it is starting with the text, making sure I know what every single word means, how do I want it to mean, and how do I want it to come off for our 2025 eyes and ears. And how do I want these characters to form? What are their relationships? How do they move in the space? How do they move with each other? What does the lighting look like? And because it was a pre-existing design, I did have a chance to kind of make it my own a little bit with the lighting designer. And we already did that actually at the end of January. Another part of working at the big opera houses is they often will tech everything prior to rehearsal starting. And so we figured out how we want the set to move, and we altered a couple of things about the set for Chicago stage, because this is their first time doing this production. It's usually at LA Opera. So we figured out a lot of the scenic elements. We set all the lighting cues already, and some other like fun things like snow and confetti and whatnot that we added in. So all of that has been teched, and so now on Monday when I start with the cast, it'll be building their staging into that world. And so I started with the text, really studying that, really utilizing my own process in when I'm staging something is really trusting the score and trusting the composer with what the composer is saying dramatically, because I think the beautiful thing about opera is that all the drama is right there, and a lot of times you can get that from the libretto, but the score tells you everything, and especially Puccini. I used to say, and I do still kind of say, that Puccini is a kind of an annoying composer to me because he just gives you everything so blatantly that there's like no chance for discovery of what it is, because it's like, it is what it is. Like you will feel this way because he writes it that way. I'm like, it's kind of emotionally manipulative in a way. But in a way, from a directing standpoint, then I'm like, okay, I just trust what he wrote, and I then express that in how it gets staged. And so it's kind of this puzzle piecing then that happens where, based on the text, based on what I hear in the music, then me being able to plan out in my head what I want all of this to look like, and also allow for some freedom for when I get into the room with these artists, something that I might be thinking of might not resonate with them. And there are some directors who will, be resistant to that, where they're like, well, no, this is my vision and this is how I want, but I am much more of a collaborative person in general, and I want my artists to feel like they have full freedom of themselves and expression to be able to take on a character how they see fit. And so I'm excited to be able to get into the room with them and to have my ideas kind of come together with their ideas, and for us to kind of create together, and allow the freedom for that. So yeah, that's a little bit.
So when the artists come in, how much leeway do you give them?
Yeah.
Within your framework? Are you working with that, or do you allow them to kind of bring their own stuff too?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because this will be like my first time doing it as like a big full project. So the way that I'm going to be approaching it, especially because I have, I think, 6 days to stage it. It's a very short timeline, which is very common in opera, and I don't even get my Rodolfo on day one, so I'm using the understudy Rodolfo and kind of just having to like create a framework of it. Again, that's very typical for a lot of opera companies, where they're like, can you stage all of this in one day with water in there? And you're like, sure, why not? It's just the name of the game. And so the way that I'm going to plan to approach it is that I will have sort of a framework, sort of a bones, a skeleton to build, and have the idea of a trajectory within the blocking in and of itself, but then allow the freedom of the artist to have play. Because I think the thing about Bohème too is that it really hinges on the camaraderie between, especially the boys, the 4 boys in the garret, and obviously like the women and their freedom too. But if you don't see an immediate sense of friendship and like they've been through life together already as these like really young kids trying to just figure out being artists together, if you don't get that, then it doesn't work at all. So my challenge, I think, is trying to build that sense of familiarity and that sense of like brotherhood within them within only a few days when not all of them are there. And I am very grateful that a lot of these artists I have worked with before. Many of them are very dear friends of mine. Actually, Gabi Reyes, who's singing Musetta, her and I, we went to Boco together. We lived together for a little bit. So she's like one of my nearest and dearest. So it's really special to have her there, actually. And because,
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it's going to be great.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a little chaotic, but like in a great way. Because the whole thing is just going to be vibes. Like we're all just going to be like vibing together in the room, and like that's what we'll need. Where it might feel like we're all wanting to actually just like chat with one another. And so my challenge, I think, will have to be like steering the ship and be like, okay, focus, for myself too. But I think that will actually lend itself to some really fun and exciting storytelling, because that's what the story needs. So we'll see if it works or not. Y'all, if you come to see it, you can let me know if it worked.
Well, some of us are going to try to get there, so we shall see. So looking back over your life, is there anything you would tell yourself now, back when you were 16, 18?
Yeah. trust the process. And I've always been a very process-oriented person. And I think I always did trust the process. But I think for my younger self to be affirmed in that gut reaction of like, you could never predict where, I'm gonna get emotional, you can never predict where this journey will take you. And I never would imagine that I'm working at the biggest opera houses in the country. Like, I never dreamed and said, like, I want to work at the Met, I want to work at Lyric. Like, so I'm at a point where I'm like living beyond my dreams. And it's just such a beautiful thing. And I think I only got there by the grace of incredible teachers and mentors and me trusting myself and following my gut. So being able to say to my younger self, like, just trust, and it will work out, you know? Like, the thing that I often say to young students who are trying to figure it out, and, you know, if you don't necessarily know where you want to go or what you want to do, or that you have multiple interests, I say good. Like, that is a beautiful thing. And if you are able to define for yourself a value set for your life and for your art, and that might cross over, but know what your values are, and so long as you are following those values, you can't make a wrong decision. All of it is going to be tools that you're putting on your tool belt that will benefit you later. The way that I learned how to perform, the way that I learned how to study, the way that I learned how to stage manage, all of it fuels the way that I direct. And I don't even know where the next trajectory will take me. I ultimately have goals of being more in executive leadership at an opera company, and I feel like being in the room making art happen right now is continuing to put tools on my tool belt for if ever that gets to be something that I get to do. But really trusting in yourselves and knowing what your values are and defining that now, and also allowing for those things to change. Like, your values might change, and that's a beautiful thing. Your goals might change, and that's a beautiful thing. Allow for the grace in that process and trust it, and you can't go wrong.
Oh, I so agree with that, yes. I think many of us have had all kinds of journeys to get where we are now. You know, I left teaching for a long time, and then I came back. You know, I've had several careers myself, so you got to follow your heart. You got to follow what you feel inside, and that's what I said before. You've got to have a burning desire to be a musician if you want to be a musician. And you can't just sit on that. You've got to do something about it, which takes hard work, and hard work.
Yeah.
Right?
And continuously so. Yeah.
She worked extremely hard all the time, and who knew she was going to be directing? I mean,
I didn't.
We certainly never discussed that kind of thing when she was in college.
No,
never.
not at all.
You know, so go with the flow, people. Go with the ride and let it happen. So I have no idea what time it is, but does anyone have any questions? Don't be shy.
While you're thinking of what questions you might ask, I just want to also say and shout out the professors here once again, because truly, and I was saying this to Dr. Reich the other night, like, the way that you have so much incredible support in this department and in this conservatory now, it's a conservatory, that it is truly, truly special. And I have now been to, I've visited multiple schools, I've worked with a lot of musicians who come from different schools. Like, this community is really special. Don't take it for granted, and know that you have some of the top people in your corner. Dr. Reich has been such an amazing support and was always there for me and throughout all of my nervousness and my journey and trying to figure out my high notes. And Professor Fiedler, again, was just so incredible in my piano lesson journey, which was always not the easiest for me, but in the support of me figuring out what I wanted my academic journey to be. And Dr. Malfatti is one of I say it to many of my colleagues, that he's one of the most incredible choral directors in this country. I really, really believe that, because I've now sung with a bunch of choirs, and when I was in Boston, I had a church job and was singing with a bunch of other choirs too. Like, y'all, he's the real deal. Like, truly, you are so lucky to have him at this stage in your music development. So just, I say that to affirm that you are here, and you should do your darndest to really do the work that they say you should do, like really trust and believe them, because that is only for your benefit and your good artistic development.
Great. Any questions yet? There's one.
So I know for like a lot of our students, it's probably a lot smaller now that we get here, and like I feel like all of the students here are stretched in many different ways.
Yeah.
And I know talking to several of them across education, therapy, just general music, you seem like a person that has a lot going on. So what do you do for yourself or say to yourself, or some things that you do if you're like, holy crap, there's so much going on, I'm gonna die, like stuff like that, which
Yeah. Yeah, that's real.
So what are like some tips or things that you do to like sit in yourself again, like I got this, I've been doing this, I can continue doing this?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question, and something that I definitely, I was talking to some of y'all voice majors about this earlier in the week, but you being an advocate for yourself and knowing how to center yourself in your body and your mind is going to be such a gift to you starting now and into your own artistry and wherever your career ends up taking you, but especially if you end up wanting to be a freelancer in any sort of way, like as Dr. Ike was saying, you have to want it and you have to want to go through the ups and downs of it because it is incredibly difficult. And so ways that I had learned to start taking care of myself while I was a student here, but then it continued to solidify as I got older, are things that just like center me. So I really prioritize my workout routine. I grew up sort of afraid to move in my body. I was very ashamed of my body. I had this whole journey of like me being a taller, larger woman. I just didn't think that I could move in a particular way. And me going to therapy and getting over that and learning that there's power in my own movement was huge. It was such a big game changer because now it is a non-negotiable for me to have my workout time. Like whenever I'm traveling and if a company is contracting me and I have a choice in housing, I say, is there a gym accessible to me? And I like make sure that that is a part of my routine. I love doing yoga. I love doing boxing, spin classes, things that just kind of get my heart pumping and for my mental health, if for anything else, like it's just really great for that. And I think we kind of discount how much movement can help us in that kind of way. Like there's so much, especially in like the age of social media and TikTok and all this stuff, there's so much dialogue out there that's like, oh, you should do this workout to look like this, blah, blah, blah. Like, F that. Do whatever movement brings your body and mind joy, because really like the endorphin boost that you can get just from going on a walk, like a really simple walk, I highly recommend doing some sort of movement practice and figuring out what resonates with you. Like that really can make such a difference. And make it, a fun friend thing. Be like, hey, you want to go on a hot girl walk right now and you're just like walking around campus? Like that can also be like something that, yeah. Like get together, do it, and it can just be a really nice way to decompress. So there's that component in it. And then I've also learned for myself that meditation and just like mindfulness practices are really big for me as well. And like I said, I have a week-long silent meditation retreat that I'm doing at the end of the month. And I actually didn't quite fully align it based on my schedule, but it just so happened that it did, where I'd been following this retreat center for a while and had been hoping to be able to do something like this. And it just so happened that the week that I have off in between contracts was this upcoming week. And it's going to be really great, but something that I will try to do and hold sacred for myself is that time to sit down. So in addition to my movement practice, which I do consider very meditative for me, my sort of silent time with myself is really what helps me. And especially if I'm having those moments of like, oh my God, how am I going to do all of this? Or like, because those moments do come quite a bit, or it's like, oh my gosh, like you've got like this project and taxes and like all these other things, like where's my health insurance coming from? All of those things can sometimes be very overwhelming. And when that does hit, like I know that I have like my own breathing practices and meditation practices within that don't necessarily make those things go away, but help me remind myself that I'm capable of dealing with it. And that's the thing, is like in the world of mental health, it's not going to be about getting rid of whatever friction and anxieties are happening in your life, but knowing how to fortify your mental capability to deal with them. and things are always going to be happening in life, and you're always going to be throwing curveballs or whatever. So figuring out whatever practice you need now for your mental wellness is just going to help you be stronger later on.
True.
Yeah.
More questions?
How do you make the most out of like your practice in order to kind of have that exponential growth?
Like career-wise? Yeah. The diligence of it. Having it be an actual like daily routine, where, and even if it is just like, okay, 15 minutes today, just gonna do these scales. That's it, whatever it is, something that makes it a daily habit, because there's something about, especially when we're learning music, in our constant social media and just technology era, it can be really easy to think that, oh, if I'm just listening to it, I'll learn it, which that is a way to learn. But when you're talking about developing your voice and your technique, that is a muscular thing as well, and something that you have to train your body to do. And so in order for that to eventually become more secondary, like it has to be a daily practice kind of a thing. So figuring out some sort of routine in which, it is a 15-minute, 20-minute, something that seems more manageable, and then you might get there and you're like, actually, I'm really vibing with how this goes. Let me keep like working on this. Taking it, breaking it down into really smaller chunks is something that can help you feel less overwhelmed by it, but it has to be a daily thing. Especially when you don't feel like it, that's when it matters the most,
You heard that. Daily. A daily thing.
Yes.
As I tell my students, you've got to put it right in your schedule. Make it part of your schedule like a class. This is when I practice, and make yourself do it. Because it's real easy to say, oh, I don't feel like it today, and then today doesn't happen, tomorrow doesn't happen, and then you've gone a week and you go back to your lesson, you haven't practiced. Some of us are not happy about that.
And that's the same thing too for all of like any like mental wellness, physical wellness things. Put it in your schedule. Just like schedule it out. It make it like a homework assignment in a way where it's like, I have to get this done, and like that you're doing it for your well-being, and your future self will thank you. Like thinking about the different ways in which, what will future self be happy that I did today? That's something that I like to keep thinking.
More questions?
Who's about back there?
Can you hear her?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, because there's so many body changes that can happen, especially for female bodies through, you might even experience some different voice changes during your time of the month. You could experience changes through childbirth. You can experience changes through like different phases of life. So having the consistency of practice is definitely going to be something that is really significant. And also knowing that what you're hearing back from yourself isn't always going to be the most reliable, because there are sometimes when I think we're singing and we're like, oh, I like the way that I sound. And if you're self-monitoring too much and not trusting the ears of your teacher or your coach or whomever that you have that's giving you like the feedback to help grow and develop your voice, you can kind of get in your own way. And so I don't want to say like stop listening to yourself, but don't be so married to how your voice sounds, because it might not always sound the same, and it might not always sound in the way that you want it to sound necessarily. But if you know how it feels, and especially how the mechanism of your breathing and your alignment through your passaggi and figuring out how all of those mechanics work, it's more about the feeling of it than listening to it. And I say that because if you're singing in a hall that is really live, you'll be able to hear yourself back, and that's like a singer's ideal. Is like, oh, I like being able to hear myself. There are some halls that are super dry, and you can't hear anything, and you just have to trust how it feels, and like that is so exposed and so vulnerable. But if you're already used to not really listening to yourself, that can just help you out. I mean, even at the Met, like there are sweet spots on the stage that all the singers know that they all kind of gravitate towards, that help them hear themselves a little bit better, and it's not always the best part for staging, but there are some really dead areas on that stage, and so the singers at that level are also needing to like not really be able to hear themselves and just like trust their instruments and the way that they produce their sound. So I highly recommend is getting used to how your instrument creates the music instead of listening to that back for feedback.
More questions?
Okay, top three. Eugene Onegin. And I'm just gonna say them all first, and then they all have themes I've realized later on as I have developed this top three list. So it's Eugene Onegin, The Rake's Progress, and Marriage of Figaro. What I realized that all three of these have in common is that the female characters are so strong and have so much agency and so much tenacity about them, and I realized that you don't really get that a lot in opera from the female characters. But also, I mean, at the root of it, actually, those scores are some of the most, I think, like, brilliantly written scores dramatically. There's something about Stravinsky's writing that just, like, it just feels so, like, yummy to listen to that I absolutely love, and Tchaikovsky as well. And I think Mozart is just an absolute genius when it comes to comedy and writing both for the drama, and in Figaro, the libretto is just like a plot twist at every kind of turn. That it's kind of like the most clean way to write for that kind of dramatic development that is also hilarious, and the comedy is also written right into the score too. So it's just like it's just such a great piece to always to return to. And historically speaking, too, Marriage of Figaro was a big turning point in that art form in terms of actually featuring characters of a lower class as main characters, and of characters of agency, and characters who have a lot of power. So I think that, especially from like a lens of now, is like, what does it look like to create stories and to tell stories of social change and social dynamic within that, and that we're able to still like enjoy a story like that from, you know, hundreds of years ago is something that really excites me. But I absolutely love really working with like the characterizations of those female characters in all three operas. They're, in addition to how much I love listening to the score, they're all very special. Good question.
More questions?
Yeah.
I have been interested in going to a master's program after I graduate, and I'm kind of still on the fence about this, and I think I've talked about it right through it. I can't remember. But would you say that getting a master's degree
Is it worth it? Is that the question? I mean, I thought my journey was absolutely worth it because it introduced me to the path that I have now, for sure. What I will say is that don't feel like you have to be rushed into doing that. I definitely went right into the master's right after undergrad, but like it is 100% okay to like take a year, take 2 years to figure out what it is that you want to keep studying, because that is going to be potentially another financial burden. It's going to potentially be, you know, well, it definitely will be more energy in terms of schooling and your brain power and all that kind of stuff. And so the beautiful thing about a master's program is that it is going to hone in on what you love, hopefully, and what you want to continue developing for yourself and your skill set. And like, I remember going to grad school and being like, oh my gosh, I get to take all classes that I enjoy. Like, what? And not to say that I didn't have classes that I didn't enjoy here, but you know, you have, you know, all of your electives and everything that you're trying to fulfill for the liberal arts education. But to be able to have that sort of focus is a really incredible gift of going into a continued degree program. And so I would say, in order to do that, really take time to figure out what it is that you want to keep studying, and that it's okay if that takes a little bit more time than like the average timeline, because it is a really big decision. And then, you know, you can have the time to like go visit schools or talk to people in different programs and like get that feedback there, just like how you maybe approached your undergrad choosing. But I would say definitely permission to take time to do your research on it. Yeah, but it was definitely worth it in my opinion. Yeah.
More questions? I guess no more questions. Well, Melanie, this has been such a pleasure to have you back on campus.
It's
and
been such a
see
pleasure
you
to be
again. It's been a
here.
while since I've seen you, since our Zoom calls during the pandemic.
I know. We did do that. It was really sweet.
Yeah, that was fun. So best of luck to you.
Thank you.
In Chicago. I know it's going to be great. And then on to Pittsburgh, and then
Yeah.
on to wherever we're going. And
Yeah.
it's going to be great. And you will keep in touch with us.
Yes.
So you know where you are.
Yeah,
Yes.
let me know if you're in Chicago or Pittsburgh or New York. I'll be back to New York then after my meditation retreat, doing the new production of Aida that we just opened this season. So we have another cast with that I'll get to direct, and it's a very interesting production.
Yes.
So
All right.
come on down.
Great.
Or up.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Let's go out of here.